Burkina Faso says it has foiled a fresh assassination plot targeting its junta leaders. Authorities say the plan was set for January 3rd, with the prime target being the head of state, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Officials claim the attempt was part of a broader effort to topple the government and throw the country back into instability.
On January 3rd, 2026, at 11 p.m., a plan was in place to destabilize the country. This was to be carried out through a series of targeted assassinations of civilian and military authorities.
All right. Welcome back to This Week in Africa. We are back after a 5-week hiatus. I think it's been 5 weeks. And it's your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa related, Africa news, and topics of the day. We have a lot to cover today. Everything from the foiled coup in Burkina Faso, Somalia, Somaliland, U.S. relations, Kenya, U.S. relations, South Africa, U.S. relations, Uganda's election, and some of the changes happening in Nigeria, and also what happened with the Anthony Joshua tragic crash. I mean, I know this happened a few weeks back, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we get into today's live streams, we'd like to start with introductions. So I will turn it over to my co-host to introduce herself before I introduce myself.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be back. It feels like a gazillion years since we went live, but yeah, this was a much needed break, but I missed the show incredibly. But yeah, very happy to be back. I am Gloria Ayo. I'm a creator and founder of The African Story, even though we're in transition. But what I aim to do is to tell our stories. And of course, I love to analyze current affairs and give opinions on things that have to do with the continent. So very happy to be back co-hosting This Week in Africa with Joe.
Awesome. And we're happy to be back. Glad to have you back. So, obviously for all of your insights and historical context, it's always really helpful when we talk about these stories. And so I'm Joe Hatagwa. I'm the founder of Authentic African Media, LLC. We are a company that helps people move, visit, invest on the continent of Africa. We have an e-commerce store, and we're just bridging the gap between those living on the continent and those living in the diaspora. So with that, we have this weekly live stream where we talk about the news of the day. And as you can see, we started by playing a short clip, and we will get back to the video. But I do want to just give some insight before we get back into this video as to what actually happened earlier this year in Burkina Faso. So they have announced that they did stop a coup and an attempted assassination against Captain Ibrahim Traoré. That was planned for January the 3rd. The plot allegedly aimed to destabilize the government, with former leader Damiba orchestrating the attempt from exile in Togo. Officials report that funds were sourced from outside Burkina Faso, particularly Cote d'Ivoire. Intelligence intercepted video discussions on targeting Traoré and other officials, alongside plans to disable military responses. Despite facing numerous assassination attempts since taking power in 2022, Traoré maintained strong support, particularly among the youth, by embracing national sovereignty and distancing from Western influence. So we're going to play a little bit more from this video. The link is in the description if you want to watch the full thing, but we'll give some commentary on the other side. So let's get into it.
Beginning with the neutralization of Comrade Captain Ibrahim Traoré, head of state, president of FASO, either at point-blank range or by an operation to mine his residence.
And Burkina Faso security minister says the man behind the latest plots is a familiar name. It's Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the same general Traoré ousted from power in 2022. Damiba has been living in exile in Togo. He allegedly orchestrated the plan, raised funds, and recruited both civilians and soldiers for the attempted coup. Officials also claim that Ivory Coast financed the attempted takeover.
A large portion of the funding comes from Ivory Coast, whose most recent operation amounts to $125,000. So, I would also like to point out that arrests are ongoing, as is the dismantling of the networks.
Ivory Coast are yet to comment on these accusations. But Burkina Faso officials say intelligence services intercepted video footage showing suspects discussing how they plan to kill Traoré and other senior officials. They alleged that after the assassinations, the plan was to disable Burkina Faso's drone launch base to prevent a military response before foreign forces could move in on the ground. Authorities say the threat has been neutralized and security around key leaders has now been tightened. This was not an isolated incident. Reports suggest that since taking office in 2022, Traoré has survived at least 18 assassination or coup attempts, with some sources estimating it as high as 30. But the irony is hard to miss. Traoré himself came to power through a military coup in September 2022.
Yeah, I mean, we'll cut it there because they're talking about irony. Now, listen, I'm sure that their lives were not spared in that, but it wasn't an assassination of the former leader who was ousted. He obviously is in exile in Togo. So, I mean, that number is astonishing. The number is 18, which is the number that they have put out publicly. And I remember the last time we had spoken about this, I think the number was right around 8 to 10. And so the number of attempts are 18, some assassination attempts, some being coup attempts. Your thoughts on yet another foiled attempt in Burkina Faso?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Of course, we know there's been a lot of tension, and what makes situations like this more complex is when there are people from the inside, and by inside I mean people from the continent who are suspects of some of coups or attempted assassinations or whatever it is. Now, I did a post not long ago where I talked about leaders that were taken out, either through an overthrow or through, unalivement. And one comment that stuck out, which, of course, it's nice to keep things in perspective, is the fact that they can't do these things without somebody from the inside. There's no way, if somebody from the outside is coming in to disrupt us as a continent, they can only get in with the help of people on the inside. And that's why, all these are alleged. But it's still, it's very concerning when you have, a country like Cote d'Ivoire being mentioned repeatedly. We've gone into an analysis on this show where we talked about how Cote d'Ivoire keeps coming up, and of course the history of housing people who, for instance, have done awful things in Burkina Faso. And you think about Thomas Sankara, and that's why, as we've said repeatedly, this is why history is extremely important. We all remember what happened with Sankara and how he was unalived, of course, with help from the inside. His trusted friend, his person, Blaise Compaoré, who was the person who actually, worked hand in hand with foreign powers to unalive a man like Sankara. And that's why when people see threats or anything that looks like a repeat of what happened back then to Sankara, people are going to stand up. And, people might look at people who are standing up and saying, why would you prefer a military leader when democracy, if you're supposed to be, don't you want democracy for your country? Don't you want true sovereignty? But when you've had past leaders fail in their job to secure the land, fail in their job to protect the country's sovereignty, you will have people come out, as they've done for Traoré, you will have people come out to defend somebody who they believe has more of their interest at heart than somebody who would possibly sell them out to foreign interests or foreign powers. So what I see going on now, Burkina Faso is like the lab, for a new form of government in Africa that chooses, like Sankara did, to prioritize security and sovereignty over pleasing anyone, putting your country's interest first. That's what is going on with Burkina Faso. And that's why not only is he getting support from Africans on the continent, he's getting support from Africans throughout the diaspora, the Caribbean, everywhere. But yeah, we'll keep our eyes on this one. And the fact that this man could have been unalived is just scary. But shout out to his team for being on guard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I over the last 2.5 years since I've been doing This Week in Africa, I mean, we've talked about it on so many occasions, the attempts on his life, and at least the coup attempts, and how they've all been foiled. And he obviously having been a part of one previously, and the thing is, he was a part of two, right? Because he helped install the former military leader. But that person did not live up to the expectations of the people, according to him and people around him and people who reported on this. And so then he was ousted. And, the people of the country really support what Ibrahim Traoré has been doing. There's been lots of posts on this, Sovereign Media, I think, who, have a lot of folks who used to be a part of African Stream have reported on this a ton because, they have people on the ground in Burkina Faso, so they can speak to people directly. And what you find is that people, I've of course, whatever country you're from, right? All over the world, you have people who are strong supporters of the president, right? There's going to be people who are against them. There are going to be people who support them. In Burkina Faso, there are people willing to put their lives on the line to protect Ibrahim Traoré. I mean, there are people who do civilian like night watches, and they roam the streets at night to ensure that he is protected. Even though he has a strong military force, there are civilians. And that's the difference between why people want to call this a revolution versus calling it a coup. A coup is usually 4 to 5 people and a foreign backer, taking over a country. In a revolution, I think where people feel like the country is behind it, there's a movement behind it. And obviously, since he's been in power, he's made a lot of strides in the areas of dairy and natural resources and farming and a number of other things to ensure that the country is wiping out its debt, is putting people to work, and is actually giving people a fighting chance and producing their own goods for export, and then building other trade partnerships that, of course, anger the West. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of follow up and see over the coming years. He has another, I think, 4 years in this particular role. So we'll see, what happens at the end of that 4 years. But from everything that we're seeing, the people continue to support him. And, it looks like it's going to be much harder than $120,000 or whatever the amount was that was mentioned to try to take him out. So we'll keep a close eye on this and keep you guys posted as time goes on. So moving on from Burkina Faso, we want to move into Somalia and Somaliland. Somaliland is a portion of land in what is today modern-day Somalia. And, their independence efforts are escalating, backed by Israel and also potentially others. And, I posted this meme on Instagram a few weeks ago that I think was a really good explanation of why many people believe that that Somaliland is being backed by Israel. And I thought I would share that before we get into the video. I just need to find it first. But what it does is depicts a soldier pointing a firearm at Iran from Somaliland. And the idea is, the reason why they're being supported so much by another country like Israel might be because of their proximity to Iran. It just gives another opportunity to have another place to attack from. Now, that's what the political cartoon is depicting. And that is what many people are alleging when they talk about it. And sorry, I said Iran, I mean Yemen. So excuse me, Yemen was actually the image that was being depicted, not Iran. So I want to take that back. Iran is another country that is in the crosshairs of Israel. But this particular case, geographically, it's Yemen. And so I'm going to share that really quickly so you guys can see that. So let me put that up on the screen. So this is the image that was posted, right? So this is the political cartoon. And this was done by Sovereign Media. And so, and you see it here, right? He's, you know, there's a flag, there's an Israel flag there. The army soldier has a, you know, Israel flag on his back. And then, of course, he is pointing a firearm at Yemen. So that's the idea. And that is what is speculated by Israel's continued support of, you know, a potential break off of Somaliland from Somalia. So I'm going to play a quick video on how other actors who have been known to have taken part in other conflicts around the continent of Africa have been responding and reacting to this. Particularly the UAE has reportedly silently recognized Somaliland by accepting its passports while simultaneously barring travelers with Somali documents. This significant policy shift follows Israel's move to become the first UN member state to officially recognize the breakaway region. While Abu Dhabi has not issued an official declaration, a change in its visa website has drawn attention. Abu Dhabi's move aligns with its deep-seated strategic interests in the Horn of Africa. Central to UAE's strategy is the port of Berbera, managed by Dubai-based DB World, which offers a vital alternative to Djibouti in the Gulf of Aden. So by strengthening ties with Somaliland, the UAE aims to secure its maritime influence and counter regional rivals like Saudi Arabia, which remains allied with the federal government in Mogadishu, Somalia. So with that, I am going to play this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Hello and welcome. Our top story is from Somalia's breakaway region, Somaliland. Israel became the first country to recognize the breakaway region, and now another country seems to be following suit. It's the United Arab Emirates. Abu Dhabi has not made any official announcement, but according to media reports, the UAE is accepting Somaliland passports while travelers holding Somali passports are barred. Last month, when Israel announced its move to recognize Somaliland, countries from Africa to Europe and Asia lodged protests, but Abu Dhabi chose not to condemn Benjamin Netanyahu's move. Abu Dhabi has its own strategic interests in maintaining ties with both Israel and Somaliland. Starting with Israel. Back in 2020, Abu Dhabi broke away from decades of Arab consensus and normalized ties with Israel by signing the Abraham Accords. Though the UEA criticized Israel's offensive in Gaza, it has maintained diplomatic ties with Israel, which is a close US ally. Now, coming to Somaliland, the region unilaterally declared independence from Somalia in 1991. The smallest territory has its own passport, currency, and army, and it is seeking global recognition for decades. But Somaliland's strategic location makes the region important. It sits right next to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It is a narrow stretch of water through which nearly 30% of global container trade passes. And this is what Abu Dhabi wants to capitalize on. At the center of this strategy is the port of Berbera. A UAE-based company runs the port, which is a strategic alternative to Djibouti in the Gulf of Aden. In 2017, Somaliland allowed the UAE to build a military base in Berbera. Later, it was designed for civilian use. The UAE has also been training Somaliland security forces, and it maintains a consulate-level presence in Hargeisa. At large, the UAE wants to carve its own sphere of influence across West Asia and Africa. And for that, it must counter the influence of its rivals like Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
All right, so we'll leave it there. Just because in the interest of time, but your thoughts, Gloria, on this story with the UAE and Israel supporting Somaliland's breakaway from Somalia.
Yeah, and of course, everyone, it's the game of geopolitics, the Game of Thrones, as it were, where everyone decides which country they want to align with, in order to protect their own interests. But anyway, the recognition of Somaliland by Israel actually made Israel the first UN member state to officially acknowledge Somaliland's sovereignty from Somalia, which it broke away from. And of course, that has caused a lot of tension, a lot of friction between both countries. But as was mentioned, this is a pivot that's clearly aimed at the Red Sea. So Somaliland used to be a British protectorate. And after it gained independence, it entered a voluntary union with the former Italian Somalia just days later. So this union with Somalia disintegrated through a brutal civil war that happened in the 1980s. And while it has functioned as a stable state for over 30 years, it's maintained its own currency, it has its military, it has its own passport. It's remained legally unrecognized until this announcement by Israel, which is why this story is very important. Now, beyond the diplomatic status, this agreement actually involves the establishment of an Israeli military base on the Somaliland coast. But the big elephant in the room, what everyone thinks is extremely sensitive, is basically the element of this deal, which involves allegations that Somaliland may host displaced Palestinians from Gaza in exchange for recognition, even though the officials have denied it. So UAE also, getting involved, it's just, again, a game of geopolitics. And whenever it's people from the outside coming in, and it just gets so muddled. And of course, we as Africans think we always need support. I'm not against allyship, but we always feel we need support from the outside. And then I guess we'll just watch to see how this develops.
Yeah, and I'll say, anytime you have a civil war in a country, you have a number of displaced people, refugees especially. And so, this civil war in particular led to a lot of refugees in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of leads to the next story, because I think you said everything. So there's nothing really more for me to add there, except the fact that this led to a huge refugee status in the United States throughout the 80s and 90s, right? And so you even have politicians now in particularly in Minnesota, right, who and large numbers of Somali refugees, including Ilhan Omar and many others, who now live in Minnesota. And so there has been a widely publicized fraud case that happened, which, by the way, was led by an American person. However, there were many Somali people involved, but it wasn't led by an American Anglo-Saxon heritage American who led the ring of fraud. And then there was a very recent viral video by a young man who's not a journalist, who went around to a number of daycares to try to prove that these were basically just taking government funds. And I think it's been largely debunked. Most of what he did, he went during non-hours. He argued that the daycares were locked. That's what daycares do. They lock their doors, right? Do daycares just allow random people with cameras and 2 big security guards to try to come into a daycare? Generally, no. Right. So, and of course, he did not go during office hours. That's all been proven, which then helps to understand why there weren't any kids around. But he's going up to a daycare and saying, where are the kids? You have kids here? Where are the kids? So, of course, they're going to act with a little bit of a response to that. So, but all of that tied in with an actual story of a fraud case that did happen has led to a pretty aggressive approach by government agents in Minneapolis and in Minnesota, which led to, of course, the unaliving of someone recently. But let's talk about this particular story, because Trump is calling for mass arrest of Somalis in Minneapolis. So the Trump administration has intensified its crackdown on the Somali community, both within the United States and abroad, citing a report alleging that Somali couriers moved nearly $700 million in cash through the Minneapolis airport over 2 years. Trump have called for mass arrests in Minnesota. He has also accused the community of being involved in a $1 billion fraud scheme. Beyond domestic policy, the administration has also halted all aid to Somalia, accusing it of seizing U.S.-funded humanitarian supplies and destroying the World Food Program warehouse. The suspension comes as Somalia faces devastating drought and severe insecurity. So we'll play a video very quickly and have some commentary on the other side. Oops, sorry. This is where I meant.
Country in Trump's line of fire is Somalia. His prime targets are the Somalis living in America. Trump has now called for mass arrests of Somalis living in Minnesota over alleged cash transfers. He called them criminals, and to back his claims, he shared a news report. The report alleges that Somalis were transferring cash via the Minneapolis airport at an abnormal rate. The report quoted US officials saying that the cash was moved overseas by Somali couriers and that it was 10 to 100 times larger than the total foreign exodus of money at other larger American airports in the last 2 years. So far, these claims have not been independently verified. The report also quoted figures from the Transportation Secretary Administration. It is alleged that Somali couriers moved nearly $700 million in cash out of the Minneapolis airports in the last 2 years. The average stood at nearly $1 million a day. The report also cited Trump's officials slamming the Biden administration for missing the red flags. As per the report, the officials compared the alleged exodus to an ATM draining American dollars and moving them overseas. Trump's recent call for arresting Somalis is part of his wider accusation against the community of being involved in a $1 billion fraud scheme. Minneapolis.
Okay, so I'll leave it there just because this video can run really long. And just to give you guys some more insight very quickly, I just want to share the tab here of the nonprofit leader who was actually responsible for a wide fraud case in Minneapolis. She does not look Somali to me. You let me know, those of you who are watching, if she looks Somali to you. But, you know, you guys tell me where you think she's from. This is not being brought up at all. But this is the woman that was ahead of the fraud scheme. And it's the Feeding Our Future nonprofit that Amy Bach was the leader of. So she was found guilty. And so this is the woman who took part in a very large fraud scheme. But it seems like the Somalis in Minnesota are the ones who they're focusing most on. So I'll leave it at that. Your thoughts on this story, Gloria?
Yes, I'm going to come from a very different angle, Joe, if you don't mind, kind of like digressing a bit. Of course, as we know, Somalia has been in the news a lot lately. And you remember that Haiti comment that Trump made? And then, you know, when people confirmed that, I mean, we all knew, some of us knew that, of course, what he said was not true. The claim he made against the Haitian communities. And that was, I mean, that came with a lot of backlash. Actually, a lot of those people were endangered because of that single comment. And even after it was cleared and, you know, it was obvious that that wasn't true about them taking people's pets and, you know, doing whatever the president had claimed, he never came out to take it back or apologize. And as we know, whether or not we like to admit it, Trump is extremely influential because he has a strong support, not just in America, but throughout the world. So when somebody like Trump says certain things, it's actually extremely dangerous. Now, what I find really interesting regarding the Somalia incident is, you remember what he said in his first term when he made that reference to African countries and asked why people were, America was taking immigrants from S-hole countries. We've seen him accept people he has claimed were persecuted, namely white Afrikaners, of course, overlooking countries like Congo and Sudan, but choosing to, bring. Those are the only refugees we know that Trump has allowed to come. I mean, has openly welcomed to the U.S. so-called refugees. But anyway, back to the comment on S-hole countries. For him to have doubled down on that openly tells you a lot, because he knows he has this support. The man just keeps going, and he's only going as much as people are allowing him to. And I want to make it very clear that I have seen the anti-Blackness debates involving certain Somali people, but I don't believe in writing off entire communities. Not every Somali person says they're not Black. And beyond Somalia, this is more about how Africa is perceived and discussed from positions of power. Now we see what's going on in Minneapolis. Just look at the tragedy that's happened and how people at this point are on edge and just afraid for themselves. But what America forgets is that it actually is dealing with refugees from a country who are paying the price for foreign intervention that they did. It's like they forget about Black Hawk Down that happened in 1993. And on paper, America claiming that it's protecting itself from fraud, it sounds reasonable, but you're hurting a country, carelessly, dangerously hurting a country, generalizing and just reinforcing these very negative stereotypes. You're turning people against a people. You cannot participate directly or indirectly in destabilizing a region. Then you're mocking and criminalizing the people who fled that instability and decided to start over, But anyway, we can all say it's all in the past. Western involvement in Africa is very much present. We keep getting reminders, but what really hurts the most is when we get reactions like the ones we're getting from Trump.
Well put, yes. And I'll just add, look, you said it all, and I think that the piece that hits home closest to me is the refugee problem that the United States claims to have, and many times has been started by the United States, right? Regime change, funding rebels, right? Do you not think that when you overthrow a government and it's replaced by someone who does not do good for that country, that those people are not going to flee? And where do they go? They go to the place that they think is the most likely place for them to be able to build again and to build a new life. So the United States is the best at PR around the land of opportunity, the land of milk and honey, etc. And so of course people are going to want to come to those shores, right? We are of descendants and people who actually made that same decision. And so, you have to understand that of course people are going to do that. And so it is interesting to see the way the United States tends to respond to the problems that they create. So we'll continue to watch what's happening. There's many more stories that are coming out of Somalia and Somaliland. We just couldn't get to all of them just in the interest of time. But we just wanted to make sure we shared that with you. Moving on to another story that we have reported on this platform before, and it's Nestlé and its products. So those of you who don't know, I lived in Ghana for a couple years, and every time we had like a company event, we always had these Nestlé products, Milo, the Nestlé's teas. Their products were always around, right? They were just, Milo is something I never had before in the States, but I guess it's very popular in West Africa. And so we had reported on this previously, or had read the reporting on this, that Nestlé had been putting more sugars and other things in the versions of the products that they sent to Africa and Latin America and places, basically what you would consider the global South, than they had in their own countries, right? In European countries. And so with that, a major baby food recall by Nestlé affecting multiple African countries, including Egypt, Ethiopia, Namibia, Eswatini, and South Africa, due to potential toxins contamination from crude oil. Or sorry, so from what is it? Cerulide? Sorry, cerulide, crude oil? Cerulide. Health officials urge parents to check product codes and return affected items for refunds. I think one of the things that people have to keep in mind is that most of what is purchased is not purchased from a grocery store, right? Once it comes into the country by a distributor, there are people who like have these individual shops in a lot of these countries. A lot of times they have like container shops or smaller shops. They're not always alerted of the recalls. And most people who make acquisitions and purchases of food items don't go to supermarkets where they usually have a system for recalls. They go to these individual sellers. Those people are still selling. This thing happened with Maggi as well. Maggi's a very popular spice that people put in their food. Maggi had a recall. Most people were not aware and consumed the recall Maggi because you buy it from the person across the street from you. I don't have any images of it, but it's generally like a smaller shop that's selling, you know, like a consignment shop, but selling these items. So anyway, my point is that they were supposed to check the codes, return affected items, and get refunds. In Ethiopia, products were sold without proper registration, prompting warnings against use. Despite no confirmed illnesses, Nestlé blames an ingredient from a third-party supplier. So the recall involves over 800 products across 37 countries, making it one of the largest in the company's history. Critics highlight that the situation exposes vulnerabilities regarding child safety, especially in regions with limited access to clean water and safe storage conditions. So we're going to play a little bit from this video and have some commentary on the other side. Give me 1 second to present the screen.
Yes.
Here we go.
A major baby formula recall is now hitting Africa. Nestlé has expanded global product warnings over fears of toxin contamination. And that recall is raising the alarm about infant nutrition for millions of families across the continent. Egypt, Ethiopia, Namibia, Eswatini, and South Africa are among the countries affected in the continent. Officials say multiple batches of baby formula are now being pulled from the shelves, and parents are being urged to check product codes immediately. Nestlé says it is recalling select batches. The concern is possible contamination with cerulide, a toxin that can cause nausea, vomiting, and stomach cramps. Health authorities warn symptoms can appear within just 6 hours of consumption. African regulators have moved quickly. In South Africa, the National Consumer Commission says the affected products were sold locally and exported to Namibia and Eswatini. They are urging customers to return it to the place of purchase for a full refund. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, the Food and Drug Authority has issued its own warnings. Officials say the product was not registered by the authority, but had been allowed on sale. Parents are being urged not to use the affected batch and to return it immediately to retailers. Egypt has also ordered a precautionary recall of the affected batches, with officials urging parents to dispose of the product safely. Nestlé insists that there have been no confirmed cases of illness linked to the baby formulas, while they are blaming the issue on an ingredient supplied by a third party and are promising full refunds to customers.
All right, we will leave it there. Your thoughts on this story, Gloria?
Yeah, okay. So just going to the 1970s and 80s, there was a scandal involving milk nurses. And during that era, Nestlé was accused of aggressive marketing in developing nations, allegedly employing saleswomen to dress up as nurses and go around convincing mothers to abandon breastfeeding in favor of formula. Now imagine areas that didn't have access to clean water. They'd mix that formula with contaminated water or over diluted just to save money. And then this actually reportedly led to millions of infant deaths. Now, in 2026, there's a recall, as we've shared, and of course, this seems precautionary. This is voluntary, but we cannot forget the history of exploitation, like what you said about, too much sugar in our formula. These are infants, and we can blame Nestlé all day, yeah. Of course, they have a lot of the blame to take. Actually, they have most of the blame to take. But our leaders, what are you doing to regulate and protect your people? I mean, you can't even protect the lives of infants. What exactly are our priorities? And this is why when we talk about, what our governments should be doing, something like health, is often overlooked. And we're dealing with cases of corruption when there's much bigger fish to fry. If the EU is able to protect its country, I mean, that products you will not take to the EU, that products you will not take to America, but Africa has become the dumping ground, because they know the governments are not going to do anything. That's the only reason Nestlé does what it does. Our governments inadvertently or otherwise enable this. What African nations need right now, more than ever before, we need food sovereignty. There's urgency, as far as localized production of infant nutrition. We can localize this stuff. It doesn't have to be foreign. And please do not demonize breastfeeding. Nothing will ever replace it. It's number one. I don't know which mother needs to hear this. If you're able to breastfeed, and I'm not trying to, put pressure on you, because I know sometimes it can be difficult for mothers, but please do not demonize it. And that's why that scandal in the 70s and 80s was huge. For them to have gone that far just to sell products. They don't care. They don't care about the lives of Africans. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, look, capitalism rules all, right? This is the world we live in. And so it's all about, increasing profits and margins at all costs. Most people don't care. You have the same issue with fake drugs being sold, right, in the pharmaceuticals industry across the continent of Africa. Same issue, right? I mean, there isn't a one body across the continent that handles these kinds of things. Every country has its own FDA, like a Food and Drug Administration, and so you have the same thing affecting many countries, and they don't even know. Right, there's no inter-country communication, and this goes back to what you said about the leadership, and also just in terms of, the separation. Each country just feels like they should focus on themselves and outside assistance outside the continent instead of working together within the continent. I think we'd learn so much more, and we'd be able to prevent these kinds of things. So to be clear, cerulide is a toxin produced by some strains of Bacillus cerealis, which is related to, and so it is a potent cytotoxin that destroys mitochondria. It causes nausea and vomiting. So this is what traces of it ended up in these Nestlé products. Don't know what it's used for, but just wanted to give people a little bit of insight into what it is. So yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it all comes down to capitalism. And I am not going to demonize capitalism. I just think that we should be, it should have guardrails, right? Obviously, because people will do what's always in their own personal best interest, even if it impacts large groups of people negatively. It's just where we are in the world today. It's just how it works. And so we do need guardrails, and that's why some form of regulation around food and drugs on the continent-wide is absolutely necessary, but done by competent Africans. It does not need to be done by Europe or the United States or anywhere in Asia. It does need to be done by competent Africans, and that's what we'd like to see. Those are the things that we call for, right? When we talk about all these things, it's like sovereignty and competent sovereignty. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the next story. So on the topic of health, so speaking specifically to health and the story of Anthony Joshua and what happened was right around Christmas Day 2025. We haven't had a chance to talk about this because it's the first time we are doing a live stream since then. Real quick recap for those who aren't aware, right? Anthony Joshua was in a vehicle with two of his friends. One of them is his personal trainer outside of camp. Another one is a trainer that works with him within camp. And Anthony Joshua and the driver were the two people who survived. He was sitting behind the driver. His two friends were sitting on the passenger side and the back passenger seat. And the accident that occurred was a fatal accident where the driver went to overtake another vehicle and hit a parked car. And with that, the two people on the right-hand side of the vehicle perished. And so, I did a live stream a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last Monday. Yeah, it was last Monday when I was traveling about, what I see being in West Africa and just being honest about vehicles overtaking other vehicles and driving recklessly and dangerously. And so that was one piece of the story, which I didn't hear much about. Many people were talking about the fact, two things. One, that Anthony Joshua didn't have police escorts, considering he just had what most people say an $80 million payday. The other thing was the fact that there was no emergency response system or like ambulance service that was able to pick him up. He had to be escorted to the hospital and then, from what I understand, evacuated out of the country for medical treatment. Now, there are like layers to that. Before I give my opinion and my thoughts on it, and the fact that there is actually there is a sort of a positive story that comes out of this, right? And the fact that there's hospitals being built and people taking their private wealth into their own hands and to make some adjustments and to try to fix some of these challenges. Because I think some of the biggest issues is the public hospital systems that don't pay doctors well, that are in conditions that aren't up to the par for the size of the country or the GDP of the country or the funding that it can get and should get and does get, but it doesn't go towards these things. But I think before I give my opinions and my thoughts, I do want to turn it over to you, Gloria, because this had happened in Nigeria. And I know obviously this is your country of origin. And so wanted to get your thoughts on this Anthony Joshua story and then the subsequent story that you wanted to talk about in terms of the hospital being built.
Yes. And did you want me to also touch on the Chimamanda Adichie angle?
Yeah.
Okay. So for those who are not aware, and Joe has spoken very well, basically covered, the car crash, which was very tragic, that happened in December involving Anthony Joshua. And sadly, he lost two of his close friends. And then Chimamanda Adichie, early this year, lost her child, one of her twin boys. The twin boy had what they thought was just a minor cold, and they went to get it treated, and it just escalated, and there were things that were done, and according to her, the boy was given too much propofol, and before you know it, cardiac arrest, he's gone. So what makes this really ironic and sad is the fact that these are two very powerful global figures. They're not just superstars in Nigeria. These are superstars globally. And for them to have encountered these kinds of experiences lets you know that when there is failure in government, it affects everyone. Nobody is immune to, something tragic happening on that scale. I mean, these are huge tragedies. And yes, I do agree that these things could have happened anywhere in the world. I mean, I've heard cases of people who left Nigeria for treatment abroad, and it ended up being very tragic. So I'm not here to, just say Nigeria bad, the rest of the world great. No, that's not the point. But what I do find concerning, let me just get to it. What I find concerning is the number of people who come out to distract from the necessities that we have on ground, the things that we do need. The world was basically analyzing the car crash, talking about how Nigeria does not have an emergency response system. On a global level, that was so embarrassing to watch. Something as basic as an ambulance coming, we didn't have it. I mean, look at the close friends just being on the road as they were, like their bodies, like that was just very, very hard to watch. And I didn't even mean to watch it. I thought it was maybe just clips from, because I got it right after it happened. And I'm like, I deleted it immediately. That was so awful. I couldn't sleep for days. The point I'm making is we're expending so much energy trying to explain away how it could have been in any country in the government, when we should just collectively hold our government responsible. There are certain things that are not negotiable. I just talked about that when we're talking about the Nestlé situation. Healthcare is not negotiable. Regulation of health services, regardless of how big the hospitals are, as was the case with Chimamanda's child, is not negotiable. You ensure that hospitals do what they're supposed to do. When that case with Chimamanda's child happened, the hospital put out a statement basically clearing itself of all blame, and then talked about, it's going, saying it would do some investigation. But you already basically absolved yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to talk about going, investigating. It's just sad. I call it a state of anyhowness. But when you have division in a country, as you've had in Nigeria, as we know with the last election, when the people are divided, we're not able to just collectively speak. It's not about castigating the government. It's about asking them, holding them accountable to do things that are basic, that God forbid could affect you, defending them, and trying to distract from those things that are supposed to be urgent. But when even you who defends them, you don't treat it as urgent, then they won't. And God forbid, we keep having these kinds of cases. Imagine the ones that we've not heard about, the ones that don't, that are not children of people on the level of Chimamanda, or that are involved in car crashes, but the people in there are not known, as was the case with Anthony Joshua. We all know him, So these cases go on. That road where that car crash happened, every other day, I think based on the statistic I've seen, based on my research, every other day there's the loss of life on that same road. We haven't heard of any more since, but instead of, again, expending so much energy defending, let's hold our governments accountable, and the governments just do right by the people. That's all we ask. But shout out to Folorunsho Alakija, who has established a training hospital, state-of-the-art. That's something that you would expect the government to do, instead of, spending all this taxpayers' money flying abroad for treatment. Mm-hmm. Like, spend so much time outside the country getting treated. But, Folorunsho was able to put money, establish a state-of-the-art facility, and hopefully we get more like that. And I hope it, something great comes out of it, but I think it's a great first step.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, look, I have this thought process, and I say this all the time, regardless of the country. I do believe that government officials should be required to go to public hospitals and have their kids go to public schools. I think that would change the state of public hospitals and public schools everywhere in the world if that was the case. Right now, if the politicians aren't required to see the state of the hospitals that they send money to, and they're responsible for building and maintaining, they're not going to do anything to fix them. So some numbers that came from, Africans All Free. Now, I'm sure they've gotten this from, some sources, but these were the numbers that they posted in this particular post that I showed on screen. 16,000 Nigerian doctors have migrated out in the last 5 to 7 years from Nigeria. According to them, 48.9% of major Nigerian medical school graduates go abroad within the last 15 years. According to them, they also mentioned that 55,000 doctors have left to serve are left to serve 200 million Nigerians. So what they're saying is that would average about 3.9 doctors for every 10,000 Nigerians. That is obviously, hospitals are overwhelmed. There just is no way to get adequate care to the growing population there. And this is something that does need to be addressed. And, we have to call it out. I mean, if people don't know, they're not going to do anything about it. So, look, we are not here to make disparaging remarks about every government, but we do need to call out some of the challenges that we see, so that those who are interested can work on solutions. Now, moving on from this story, there was one final story or a couple of stories that we wanted to go into, but in the interest of time, maybe we can just run through them as headlines, and then we can kind of kind of wrap it up. So there are elections in Uganda happening very soon. You guys might remember Museveni. Was it Museveni? I don't ever know how to pronounce his name. The president of So he's the president of Uganda. He's been in charge for over 20 years. There is a popular younger candidate who is popular amongst the youth. In fact, the election is happening today, and it pits longtime President Museveni against popular singer turned politician Bobi Wine. Museveni, who held power since 1986, I was 2 years old when he became the president of the country, is seeking to extend his 4-decade rule amidst growing international concern over democratic backsliding. The campaign trail has been defined by volatility. Bobi Wine, often seen wearing a bulletproof vest, has faced repeated detentions, and his supporters have encountered tear gas and mass arrests by state security forces, with other major opposition figures also sidelined as well. And if I remember correctly, I think his bodyguard, Bobi Wine's bodyguard was arrested by Museveni's son or some security force at one point in time as well, over the last couple of months. So your thoughts on the election that is happening today in Uganda?
I can't wait for next Thursday. But shout out, meaning would have seen what would happen. And hopefully we have positive things to share from this election. Hopefully the people's will counts. You know, as soon as Museveni declared it was running yet again, of course, that wasn't a surprise to us. And I hate to have that attitude, you know what I mean, of seeming resigned to fate, or to, you know, because we've seen the pattern with certain leaders and we almost know how it would go. And that's why, you know, going back to the Traoré story, you know, when you have people like Traoré step in, I mean, can we see why? How can somebody hold on to power for decades, refusing to leave, since 1986, refusing to leave, and he thinks he should run yet again? Is there nobody else who can do it? But anyway, shout out to the people of Uganda. Bobi Wine, good luck.
Yes, good luck. I have a couple of friends who are Ugandan who are voting in today's election, and they are very big Bobi Wine fans, and that is who I know they are voting for. They are not optimistic that he will win. They are pretty sure he won't win, but they're still going out to exercise that civic duty. So we will keep a close eye on this election, and next Thursday we will give you the update. So we'll probably know within a few hours, knowing how these things go. Free and fair, yeah, I doubt, but and a result will be out. So we will keep you guys posted as we learn more. Moving on to the next story. Kenya pauses $1 billion China trade deal after pressure from the U.S. president. Kenya has paused a significant trade deal with China valued at nearly $1 billion due to the pressure from the current administration. The trade agreement, pending cabinet and presidential approval, involves tariff cuts on Kenyan exports like tea, coffee, and fish, which would help reduce Kenya's trade deficit with China. However, U.S. warnings suggest that rapid engagement with Beijing may jeopardize Kenya's access to future U.S. trade programs, particularly after the expiration of the AGOA Act in 2025, which previously provided Kenyan goods duty-free access to the U.S. market. Thoughts on the U.S. stepping in and stopping this deal with China for Kenya?
Why can't we have multiple partners? And this is why Ramaphosa keeps getting in trouble with Trump, because he has, you know, allies that the U.S. is not necessarily a fan of. But for you to just, you know, try to determine who anyone can work with, and I understand it's a game of politics, but of course Kenya is going to always lean towards, I mean, I'm not saying always like it's indefinite, but with the current regime, Kenya will very likely cater to U.S. interest and China's or whichever other partner.
Yeah, and Ruto, right? We mean Ruto
specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I know some people who live there who help people repatriate to Kenya, you know, and they work with the current government. So, you know, one of the things that that comes up a lot when you talk to folks who are living there is, you know, there's kind of two different worlds, right? Like in many countries, right? There's those who move there and who live a life that they could never imagine. And then there are those who are on the ground protesting every day just because they see the way government funds are being spent. I mean, we talked about that $2 million plane flight that should have cost no more than $80,000, including all of the security. Yeah, so those kinds of things, I think, come up all the time in the conversations when it comes to the country of Kenya. So we will keep a close eye for sure moving forward. Okay, lastly, we wanted to talk about South Africa's Ramaphosa backing the Afrikaner refugee scheme for the United States. So you guys might remember last year was Ramaphosa came to the United States. He was shown pictures of Congo and was told that these were Afrikaners that were under a quote unquote genocide in South Africa. And so that led to a refugee program allowing 60 at the time. I think the number has increased refugees. And as far as we understand, as you mentioned earlier, the only refugee program that is currently still in effect is South African Afrikaners of Dutch descent are the only refugees being allowed into the United States, period. So in a significant diplomatic shift, South Africa has reportedly agreed to stop interfering with the controversial U.S. refugee program targeting Afrikaners. The program, a centerpiece of the current administration's Africa policy, stems from its widely contested claims of quote unquote white genocide and systemic land seizures in South Africa. While Pretoria continues to dismiss these allegations as false, officials now state they will respect the right of the citizens to migrate freely. Your thoughts on backing out of this and just allowing for this refugee program?
They should go if you feel, just leave, you know, go home, go back, and then let's see how it goes. Good luck. Because it's definitely not the same thing, okay? The privilege you enjoy where you are, you're not going to get here. But on a serious note, Ramaphosa, clearly, again, like I just said, you have to just find a way to appease Trump. I mean, I just look forward to, I mean, that's why, again, Traoré is so popular, you know, doesn't care about it, man. It'll put the West, and I'm not here trying to act like, you know, the West is entirely bad, but we do need leaders who you stand up all the way in the interest and dignity of the continent. You speak up and you act and you stand on it firmly. Those are the leaders. That's why even Robert Mugabe, you see people quoting him now because he boldly stood against certain things that were said. I may not necessarily agree with everything he did, but one thing you can't take away from him was his boldness. Even Idi, I mean, they were bold enough to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, sometimes you're dealing with a country that has a heavy hand and you're trying to figure out how do you as a country continue to improve the conditions of your people. And if we're going to be charitable about it, I guess we would say in some of these cases, you have to choose your ally. At least that is the way they are disclosing it, right? That's the way that they're communicating their decisions on the continent to make these kinds of decisions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you. Go. I mean, the thing is, I just don't like when you have an immigration policy that is specific to specific people. So, you know, there are many dreamers, people who are DACA recipients, right? Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, people who came as children whose parents overstayed a visa. They had nothing to do with it. They don't have a pathway to citizenship today, right? Meanwhile, what I'm understanding is that there's been a pathway to citizenship set up, I guess through executive order, for these quote unquote refugees, Afrikaners from South Africa. So why can't all these people who've been paying taxes, contributing to American society, many of which are in their 40s, 30s, 20s, even 50s, who have been paying taxes to the United States, contributing to the U.S. economy, don't have a pathway to citizenship, but you can have a pathway to citizenship for those who are voluntarily leaving a country that does not persecute them in any way. I think it's interesting, and I will leave it at that. So a couple more stories that we could go through. I guess we could kind of do rapid fire. I was going to say Elon Musk accuses South Africa's discrimination because the Starlink license wasn't approved by South Africa. Any thoughts on that? Elon?
Ooh, Elon, stop it. Stop crying. Stop whining. We're tired of it. Bye.
Yeah.
Why don't you just stay in America permanently as a refugee and I'm sure the people will rejoice and be glad. Next.
Last thing I'll say about Elon is this is another thing that we need to be better at on the continent. Starlink is far and above the best product for internet connectivity on the continent of Africa. Now, as far as I've seen it from everyone I've spoken to, and I've spoken to people from at least 15 different countries. I know there's 54, but these are all the countries that they say are the most developed. So you tell me if you know anybody who has a better internet connectivity than what's happening with Starlink. That's the reason why people are holding their nose and buying Starlink, satellites because they want to be able to have access to internet in any African country. I will tell you, there are people here in the United States that complain that it's not as good as the internet connectivity as other internet connectivity services here in the United States, and many of them we still have challenges with. But we do need to be better. There are a lot of monopolies or duopolies in a lot of these countries. There's not a lot of competition, and therefore they don't feel like they need to improve their services. And the services are bad. They are bad. And listen, I wish that wasn't an option that people have to take, but everybody I talk to who has to upload video files, download video files, has to do Zoom calls or Google Meet calls for work, especially people who work remotely. Every single person I talk to complains about this, no matter what country they're in, and they're all looking at Starlink as an alternative. So we need to do better on the continent.
Yes.
Okay. We'll leave it at that because at time, Gloria's alarm is telling us it's time to go.
Oh no, sorry, guys.
Joking, but no, we are over time, guys. I'd love to keep this going, but we are over time, and I do have a day job, so I do have to get back to my day job. But any final thoughts, Gloria, before we go?
Just thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out on our socials at authentic_African. I think in most places except
Instagram.
Except Instagram.
No, it is on Instagram.
Oh, that's Instagram.
Just a version of Authentic African.
Got it. And then Authentic African everywhere else. I'm at the Gloria Ayo everywhere. But yeah, thank you all and see you next week.
Yes, like, comment, subscribe, share this with anybody you know who's interested in what's happening on the continent. We go live every Thursday, so check us out. And with that, thanks for watching. See you guys all on the next live stream. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.